What would you do if you discovered a sinister presence lurking under your car? Imagine hearing the chilling cries of La Llorona in the dead of night, or encountering black-eyed children knocking at your door. Could a simple arcade game like Polybius really control your mind? What if your best friend was taken hostage, or a killer was hiding in your back seat? And just when you think it couldn't get worse, you find out your loved one tried to poison your baby. Are they mere urban legends, or horrifying truths waiting to be discovered? Prepare yourself for today's journey into 7 urban legends. The upcoming story is about a 16-year-old boy named Alejandro. He's lived his entire life in a small, quiet village in Mexico, surrounded by the warmth of his family and the whispers of ancient legends. But lately, Alejandro has been experiencing something eerie and unexplained. His 15-year-old cousin Isabella has been acting strange, and it seems she's been keeping a terrifying secret from him.
My name is Alejandro. I've always felt a strong bond with my cousin Isabella, even though we're only a year apart. We've grown up together in this quaint little village, nestled in the heart of Mexico, where everyone knows everyone's business, and traditions run deep. Our days were filled with laughter, playing soccer with the other kids and sharing scary stories around the campfire at night. But something changed when we turned 15. Isabella started acting distant, often disappearing into the night without a word. I could hear her weeping through the thin walls of our house, a sound that pierced my heart and kept me awake. One evening, I followed her quiet sobs to the banks of the river that runs through the heart of our village. The moon was a thin sliver in the sky, casting a silver path across the dark water. I found her sitting alone, her shoulders heaving with grief, and her eyes fixed on something in the distance. I called out to her gently, but she didn't turn around. Suddenly, the air grew thick with an unexplained chill, and the sound of a mournful wail echoed through the night. It was a cry so full of sorrow that it seemed to shake the very earth beneath us. "Isabella," I whispered, fear creeping into my voice. She looked up at me, her eyes red and swollen from crying.
"It's La Llorona,"
she murmured.
"She's been speaking to me."
I didn't know what to say. The legend of La Llorona, the weeping woman, was one we'd heard countless times from our abuelita, but we'd always dismissed it as a scary bedtime story meant to keep us in line. But the look on Isabella's face told me she wasn't making this up. She was truly terrified. And as the wail grew louder, I realized that maybe, just maybe, there was some truth to the old tale after all. The next few weeks were a blur of whispers and hushed conversations. The villagers spoke in low tones about sightings of a ghostly figure dressed in white, wandering the streets at night, crying for her lost children. They said she'd been spotted near the river, her wails growing more desperate with each passing day. I tried to convince myself it was just the wind playing tricks on our minds, but every time I closed my eyes, I heard her cries. And every time I saw Isabella, she looked paler, more haunted. One night, unable to sleep, I decided to do some research. I snuck into the village library, dusting off the ancient books filled with stories of La Llorona. According to the legend, she was a woman who drowned her own children in a fit of rage, only to regret it moments later. Her spirit was now doomed to wander the earth, weeping for them eternally. It was said that if you heard her cries, she was searching for you, seeking to replace her lost children with yours. The thought sent shivers down my spine, and I couldn't help but wonder if Isabella had been chosen. I had to find a way to protect her. But how do you fight a ghost? That's when I stumbled upon an old journal belonging to my great-grandfather. It spoke of a ritual, a way to banish La Llorona from our lives. It required courage, faith, and a pure heart. I knew I had to try it, no matter how crazy it sounded. The night of the full moon was approaching, a night when the veil between the worlds was thinnest. It was said to be the most powerful time to perform the ritual. I gathered the items needed: candles, a rosary, and a photograph of Isabella. As I set up the altar in our room, I could feel the tension in the air growing. The wind outside picked up and the candles flickered, as if in response to my racing thoughts. "Isabella," I began, my voice shaking slightly. "We're going to do this together. We're going to send La Llorona away." She looked at me with a mix of hope and fear in her eyes.
Do you really think it'll work?
I nodded, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "We have to try." As we began the incantation, the room grew colder, and the wails grew closer. It was as if the very walls of our house were crying with us. The ritual begins, and the atmosphere in the room changes. The air grows thick with an unseen energy, and I can feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. And the silence was deafening. And then, the unmistakable sound of wet footsteps, growing louder with each passing second. The door to our room creaked open, and a cold hand reached out for us. The room seems to shrink around us as the spirit draws nearer. Isabella's grip on my hand tightens, her nails digging into my skin. I can see the terror in her eyes, but I refuse to let her go. We're in this together, no matter what happens. As we continue the incantation, our voices growing stronger, louder, more insistent. The candles flicker and dim, and for a moment I thought we've failed. But then something shifts. The wails begin to recede, the coldness retreating like a tide. I feel a warmth spread through me, a sensation of protection that I've never felt before. I look at Isabella, and she's smiling through her tears. The room is bathed in a soft, calming light, and the only sound is our ragged breathing. We sit in the quiet for what feels like an eternity, too afraid to move, too hopeful to speak. And then from outside the window we hear it, the faintest whisper of a lullaby, the same one our abuelita used to sing to us. It's our mother's voice, filled with love and comfort, guiding us through the night. I knew then that we've done it. We've sent La Llorona away, and Isabella is safe.
In the aftermath, Alejandro and Isabella grow closer, their bond unshakable. They share their story with those who dare to listen, and though the memory of those terrifying nights never truly leaves them, they carry the lesson with them, that sometimes the scariest stories are the ones that show us who we truly are. Imagine hearing eerie, unsettling sounds in pitch darkness and receiving cryptic commands from an unknown voice. However, if these instructions caused you to uncover an unsettling truth about someone you thought you knew, what would you do? We are going to delve into a story that crosses these two boundaries, a story revealing the very thin barrier between these two has been trespassed.
I have always been interested in the unnerving and inexplicable. Due to this factor, when I saw The Ankle-Slicing Car Thief, True Story, on some Reddit thread, I just couldn't resist the urge to click. I scrolled down all the comments, becoming progressively more harrowing. It was on those quiet nights afterward that freaked me out. Whenever I used to park in my dimly lit apartment complex, I would hear faint scraping under my car, very much like metal against concrete. Initially, I dismissed it as part of the usual urban noises, but the frequency grew, and the sounds became more distinct. I remember well when I got out of my car and received a text from an unknown number which caused me to freeze. "Look under your car." Cold sweat left on my back. I did not quite understand what was going on. The parking lot was empty. Without anyone seeing me with my mirror-clad thoughts, I carefully crouched down and looked through the shade under the body of the car. Nothing was found. Only the shadows and cobwebs. I laughed nervously, writing it off to some sick prankster who thought it would be a good joke. My nerves were so on edge, the next day I decided to install a hidden camera under my car, just to be safe. The middle of the week rolled around, and the tension grew as thick as the fog that had settled into the city. Each day at work, I found myself checking my phone, waiting for the notification that would alert me to the camera's capture. Finally, it happened. I took a deep breath when I played the footage. My blood ran cold. There was a man, his face hidden by the darkness, slithering out from underneath my car, a gleaming knife in his hand. I recognized the worn boots from my father's old photos. It couldn't be. Or could it? I rushed home, my mind racing with questions. Why was my father, of all people, haunting me with warnings of this gruesome legend? I sat in my living room, surrounded by his old things, and stared at the framed picture of us on the drawer. It was then that I remembered the last conversation we had before his passing. He'd been adamant about me being careful, about not letting anyone near my car. But why? The following night, I waited in the car with the camera on my lap. I could feel the presence of something invisible, something evil under me. My hands were slick with sweat as I gave myself over to the inevitable. But when I stepped out, there was no one there. Only a note, tucked under the windshield wiper, written in a shaky hand that mirrored my own fear.
I'm sorry. I couldn't stop him. Dad.
It was signed. My mind reeled. Was this really happening? Was I losing my grip on reality? I called the police, but they chalked it up to a prank, despite the grim reality evident in my shaky voice. They advised me to change my parking spot and be more vigilant. But I knew it wasn't enough. I had to get to the bottom of this, to understand why my father was reaching out from beyond the grave. I dived into his old records, searching for clues. In the dusty corner of his study, I found a tattered journal, filled notes he had made about strange events in the city. There were dates, descriptions, and even the occasional sketch of the man in the boots. Then it dawned on me. My dad was investigating the ankle-slicing car thief before he died. He was close to uncovering something he didn't want me to find. As the days turned into weeks, the messages became even more frantic. Texts, emails, even a whisper in my ear while I slept.
They're watching. They know you're onto them,
he would say. The fear grew, and with it, a strong commitment to honor my father's legacy. I had to expose this monster before it was too late. One fateful evening, as I sat in my car, armed with a flashlight and the journal, something horrible happened. The scraping grew louder, and I waited, my heart pounding. When the figure emerged, I shined the light directly at his face, revealing the twisted grin of the ankle-slicing car thief. But there was something else, something familiar, a glimpse of recognition in his eyes that filled me with dread. It was my father's watch he was wearing, the one I had buried with him. The realization hit me like a freight train. The legend wasn't just a warning, it was a message, a warning from my father, trapped in a cycle of vengeance he couldn't escape. The thief lunged at me, but I was ready. I dodged the knife, and we grappled on the ground. In the struggle, the watch clattered away, revealing the truth. The thief transformed before my eyes into the very man I was looking for. My father, his soul tormented by the thing he'd been trying to warn me about. The spirit of the ankle-slicing car thief had consumed him, and now it sought me. In the end, I managed to free my father's spirit from the curse, but not without scars. The thief had sliced my ankles, leaving me with a painful reminder of a night I will never forget. But as the darkness lifted, and the legend's grip on my life loosened over time, I understood what my father had been trying to tell me. Sometimes the scariest truths are the ones that hide in plain sight, in the whispers of the night and the shadows of our own fears. And only by facing them we can find peace.
Was this the lingering spirit of a protective father, or something far more sinister? One thing remains clear: the most haunting truths often come from those who reach out to us from beyond the veil. In the end, facing these fears can lead to understanding and perhaps a measure of peace. The next time you hear whispers in the dark, remember, sometimes the answers lie just beneath the surface. In the summer of 1981, an ordinary arcade game turned into a chilling legend. It appeared out of nowhere, wrapped in mystery and whispered secrets. Players claimed it could control minds and cause terrifying visions. What would you do if a game came to haunt you, blurring the lines between reality and nightmare?
It all started back in the summer of '81. I was just a kid then, with a head full of hair and a pocket full of quarters. The arcade was our kingdom, a place where we could escape the heat and the boredom of suburban life. But there was something off about that summer, something that none of us could quite put our fingers on. It was like the air was charged with electricity, waiting for a storm that never came. And then, one day, the game appeared. Visits and my mom's worried looks. During this confusing time, something odd happened. I started having dreams that felt like real memories, vivid and scary. The strange part was, these dreams actually came true. One night, I dreamt of a little girl, lost in the local park. In the dream, she was crying for help, but no one heard her. The next day, her picture was on the front page of the newspaper, detailing her tragic disappearance that shocked our town. Just like in my dream, she was found under the old oak tree, curled up with her eyes wide open in fear. I tried to ignore it, thinking it was just a coincidence, but the dreams kept coming, each one more vivid than the last, and with every passing day, the line between reality and the game became fuzzier. The patterns on the Polybius screen invaded my mind, swirling around like a storm of pixels and static. I knew I had to find out the truth. What I discovered was more disturbing than any of us could have imagined. The game wasn't just a product of our overactive imaginations. It was real and dangerous, and it had its hooks in me deeper than I ever could have guessed. The night I decided to confront Polybius, I went to the arcade feeling both scared and determined. The place was empty, and the neon lights flickered like a dying heartbeat. I approached the game, cold sweat breaking out on my forehead. The cabinet stood there, untouched, as if waiting for me. I inserted a quarter and watched the screen flicker to life. The game began, and with it, the seizures. They became more frequent and intense. But with each one, my visions grew clearer. I saw not just glimpses of the future, but a complex web of choices and consequences, stretching out like a nightmare. Amidst it all, the whispers grew louder, voices of those lost to the game's dark grip, trapped in a digital hell of their own making. The climax came when I saw Larry, my best friend, standing on the edge of a cliff, ready to jump. I raced to that cliff, my heart pounding in my chest. I managed to pull him back, but it was too late for the game. "Game over," said the game, and I woke up in a cold sweat. The images burned into my mind. The arcade owner, an old man with eyes that had seen me laying on the ground, approached me. He took one look at the cabinet and closed the arcade for good.
"We are closing, get out!"
On my way home, I tried to reach my friend Larry, but with no success. I wanted to tell him so badly what I have seen, but since it was late already, I decided to tell him the next day at school. But Larry didn't show up in school. Not on this day, not any other day. Nobody knew what happened to Larry, not even the teachers. When I went to his home, I realized that the house was empty, completely empty, as if nobody had ever lived there. Since then, I have never seen Larry again. The game was gone, and with it my best friend. The seizures are under control now, but the visions haven't stopped. In the end, it's not the games we play that define us, but how we face the challenges that come our way.
What was the real purpose of Polybius? Was it an experiment gone wrong, or something way darker? One thing is for sure, some games should never be played. David, a 23-year-old thrill-seeker who loved the paranormal, was looking for an adventure that would push him to the limit. This trip to Fairfax County, Virginia, was supposed to be that adventure, an adventure that changed his life forever.
When I was 21, my friends Jack, Sarah, and I decided to go camping in Fairfax County, Virginia. We loved paranormal stories and often read about urban legends and ghosts. One night, Jack told us about the Bunny Man, a strange figure who supposedly haunted a bridge in Fairfax County. The story grabbed our attention. A man in a bunny costume wielding an axe, scaring anyone who came near his area. It was both scary and exciting. We read old newspaper articles from the 1970s about 2 reports of a man in a rabbit costume threatening people with an axe. No one was ever caught, but the legend lived on. The idea of camping near Bunnyman Bridge sounded scary, but we were determined. We packed our gear and left on a cool autumn morning. The drive was long, filled with nervous excitement. When we arrived, the area was unusually quiet. We found a good spot near the bridge and set up our tents. When it became darker, we gathered around a small campfire, the flickering flames creating creepy shadows on the trees around us.
I can't believe we're actually here.
Sarah said, sounding both excited and scared.
"Yeah, this is gonna be epic!"
Jack replied, trying to sound braver than he probably felt. We shared ghost stories, each one scarier than the last. The forest seemed to listen, the darkness closing in around us. Eventually, we crawled into our tents, the thrill of the day giving way to tense silence. I lay staring at the ceiling of the tent, listening to the sounds of the forest. It was then that I heard it, a faint sound, followed by a low, rhythmic tapping. My heart pounded as I tried to hear more. The sound grew louder, closer, until it was unmistakable. "Do you guys hear that?" I whispered, my voice shaking.
"Yeah."
Jack replied, his voice barely audible.
"What is that?"
Before we could react, a blood-curdling scream pierced the night. We scrambled out of our tents, our flashlights cutting through the darkness. There, standing at the edge of our campsite, was a figure in a bunny costume, an axe in his hands shining in the firelight. My blood ran cold. "Run!" I yelled, grabbing Sarah's hand. We rushed into the forest, our hearts racing, the sound of footsteps behind us. The bunny man was relentless, crashing through the underbrush with terrifying speed. We stumbled and fell, our breaths coming in ragged gasps. In the chaos, I lost sight of Jack. Panic went through me as I called out his name, but there was no response.
"Jack, where are you?"
Sarah screamed, her voice echoing through the trees. And then, just as suddenly as it began, the footsteps stopped. We collapsed to the ground, panting and terrified. The forest was silent once more. We spent the rest of the night huddled together, too scared to move. When dawn finally broke, we cautiously made our way back to the campsite, hoping to find Jack waiting for us. But he was gone. There was no sign of him, no trace of a struggle. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. We called the police, but despite a thorough search, Jack was never found. The legend of the Bunny Man had claimed another victim.
The Fairfax County Forest, once a place of excitement and adventure, is now a source of nightmares and guilt. 2 years later, David still often wonders what became of Jack, haunted by the unanswered questions. Layla's weekend alone was supposed to be quiet and uneventful, just her and Debbie enjoying some horror movies. But as the clock struck midnight on Friday the 13th, an eerie knock at the door shattered their peace. What began as an ordinary night turned into a nightmare, leaving Layla and Debbie with an encounter they would never forget.
Hi, my name is Layla, and I want to share a story that happened to me and my best friend Debbie. It all took place on a cold October night, Friday the 13th, 2023. My parents were out of town for the weekend to celebrate their anniversary, so I had the house all to myself. I'm not the type to throw wild parties or anything. Instead, I invited my best and only friend Debbie over to keep me company. We planned to stay up late, binge-watching our favorite horror movies. Little did we know, we were about to live through a horror story of our own. The evening started off just like any other sleepover. We made a big bowl of popcorn, gathered all the blankets and pillows we could find, dimmed the light and settled in front of the TV. We watched classic horror films and laughed at the cheesy effects, trying to outscare each other during scary scenes. It was around midnight when we heard the first knock. At first I thought it was just the movie's sound effects, but then it came again. 3 loud, deliberate knocks. Debbie and I exchanged nervous glances. Who could be knocking at our door at this hour?
Maybe it's just your parents,
Debbie whispered, though her voice was filled with doubt. I shook my head. No, they're miles away, remember? Let's just ignore it. It's probably nothing. But the knocking continued, growing more insistent with each round. Finally, I grew the courage to approach the door. Debbie followed closely behind me, holding a pillow to her chest like a shield. I peered through the peephole and saw 2 children standing on the porch. They looked younger than us, but there was something incredibly off about them. Their skin was pale, almost ghostly, and their eyes were completely black. No whites, no iris, just pitch-black voids staring back at me. A wave of fear washed over me. I quickly turned the lock and stepped back, keeping the chain on the door.
Who is it?
Debbie asked, her voice trembling. It's just some kids, I replied, though I couldn't hide the fear in my voice. The girl outside spoke, her voice monotonous and strangely hypnotic.
Please let us in. We need to use the phone. Our parents will be worried.
Every instinct screamed at me to keep the door shut, but there was a part of me that felt compelled to let them in. I shook off the feeling and tightened my grip on the door. I'm sorry, but you'll have to find another house, I said. We can't let you in. The girl's expression didn't change.
Please, it's cold out here. Let us in.
Debbie tugged at my arm.
Layla, we should call the police or something.
I nodded and backed away from the door, reaching for my phone. But as soon as I did, the knocks stopped. Silence fell over the house once more, even more unnerving than the knocks. We waited, hardly daring to breathe. Minutes passed, but it felt like hours. Finally, Debbie spoke.
Do you think they're gone?
I don't know, I whispered back, but I don't want to find out. We tried to go back to watching our movies, but the tension in the room was palpable. Every creak of the house made us jump, and the shadows seemed to dance with a life of their own. It was clear neither of us was going to get any sleep that night. Around 3 a.m., just when we were beginning to relax, the knocking started again. This time, it was louder, more urgent. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest as I approached the door once more. The same two children stood there, their black eyes boring into me.
Let us in.
The girl demanded, her voice no longer pleading but commanding.
Go away!
I shouted, slamming my hand against the door. Leave us alone! A look of anger flashed across the boy's face.
You'll regret this.
He hissed, and then they were gone, disappearing into the night as quickly as they had appeared. Debbie and I stayed up until dawn, too frightened to close our eyes. When my parents returned the next day, we told them everything. They tried to reassure us, saying it was probably just a prank, but I could see the worry in their eyes. They knew, just as we did, that something wasn't right.
Looking back at that night, Layla could see how it had changed her. The encounter with the black-eyed children had shattered her sense of security and left her with a lingering fear that she could never fully shake off. It taught her that some of the scariest things are the ones that come knocking at your door. Janice was a hard-working woman, focused on her career and living alone. One cold winter evening, a strange warning from a homeless man at a gas station turned her world upside down. What happened next was beyond her worst nightmares.
Hi, I'm Janice. I want to tell you about something really scary that happened to me in the winter of 2020. I was 30 years old and living in New York City. My life was mostly about work. I didn't date much, even though people often told me I was pretty. One cold night, something happened that changed my life forever. It was a Friday evening, and I had just finished work. I was tired and just wanted to go home. I stopped at a gas station to fill up my car. As I was pumping gas, I noticed a homeless man sitting near the entrance of the gas station shop. He looked at me with very serious eyes. When I finished filling up my car, I went inside to pay. As I walked by, the homeless man spoke to me.
Miss, there's a killer hiding in your car,
he said in a spooky voice. I was surprised and a little scared, but I didn't believe him. I thought he was just trying to scare me, or maybe he was just not thinking clearly. I ignored him, paid for my gas, and got back into my car. As I started driving home, I tried to forget about what he said. But then I heard a strange noise coming from the back seat. It was very quiet at first, like a soft rustling sound. I looked in the rearview mirror but saw nothing. I told myself it was just my imagination, but the noise continued. Then something terrible happened. A dark figure slowly rose from the back seat. I couldn't believe my eyes. My heart was pounding, and I felt frozen with fear. The figure was not just a person. It felt like a dark, evil presence. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't make a sound. The figure leaned forward and whispered in my ear. I felt my body go numb. It was like I was paralyzed. My hands moved on their own, gripping the steering wheel. The dark figure was controlling me, forcing me to drive faster towards the mountain pass. The car was speeding towards the rocky walls, and I couldn't stop it. I tried to fight back, but I couldn't move. Just when I thought I was going to crash into the mountain, a bright light filled the car. It was so bright that I had to close my eyes. I felt a warm, loving presence around me. It was the most comforting feeling I had ever experienced. A gentle voice spoke to me, saying,
"It's not your time yet."
The next thing I knew, I was back at the gas station, standing next to my car as I filled up the tank. I was so confused. It was like time had gone backward. I walked into the shop to pay, still trying to understand what had happened. The same homeless man was sitting outside. This time he just asked me for some spare change. I gave him some coins, my hands shaking.
"Thank you, miss,"
he said, giving me a kind smile. I drove home that night, my mind racing with questions. What had really happened? Was it a dream? A hallucination? I couldn't figure it out.
From that day on, Janice became more cautious, but also more grateful for every day. She realized that some warnings, even from strangers, should not be ignored. A man from the Philippines thought he knew his wife inside and out, but after the birth of their daughter, everything changed. What started as minor arguments quickly spiraled into unsettling behavior. As he uncovered the chilling truth, he realized the depth of the danger lurking within his own family.
Hi, I'm here to share a story that happened last January this year. For privacy reasons, I'd like to remain anonymous. This is a deeply personal and frightening tale about my wife, whom I thought I knew, and the terrifying events that unfolded in our home in the Philippines. My wife and I have known each other since childhood. We got married 2 years ago, and our daughter was born just a few months ago. At the time, I was 34, and my wife was 37. I wanted to provide the best life for our new family, so I took on a second job in addition to my already demanding full-time job. I was exhausted, but determined to make things work. When our daughter was about 2 months old, I started noticing changes in both my wife and our baby. My wife began complaining constantly. We argued more and more, and she eventually hired a babysitter to have some time for herself. At first I understood. She needed a break, but soon she was spending more and more time away from home. She would only come back in the evening to put our daughter to bed and feed her. Our baby girl also started changing. She became more distant and less responsive. She used to smile and giggle, but now she just stared blankly. It broke my heart to see her like that. I tried to talk to my wife about it, but she dismissed my concerns, saying that I was overreacting and that the baby was just going through a phase. One day, the babysitter, a kind young woman named Maria, asked to speak with me privately. She looked nervous and kept glancing around as if someone might overhear us.
Sir, I don't know how to say this, but I've seen your wife doing something strange,
she said.
She's been putting something in the baby's milk and food. I don't know what it is, but I thought you should know.
I was shocked and didn't want to believe her at first, but Maria was sincere and genuinely concerned for my daughter's well-being. I decided to take some samples of the baby's milk and food to a lab for testing. The waiting period for the results felt like an eternity. I was anxious and scared, not knowing what to expect. The results finally came back, and they were devastating. The lab found traces of poison in both the milk and food. I felt like my world was falling apart. How could my wife, the woman I loved and trusted, do something so horrible? I confronted her, and the confrontation was heated. She denied everything at first, but when I showed her the lab results, she broke down and admitted to poisoning our baby. She said she was overwhelmed and didn't know what she was doing, but I knew there was more to it. As I dug deeper, I discovered that she was cheating on me and planning to divorce me. She wanted to kill our daughter to cash in on the life insurance we had set up for her. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. The woman I thought I knew was a monster. I immediately contacted the police and made sure our daughter was safe. My wife was arrested, and the legal process began. It was a long and painful ordeal, but I had to stay strong for my daughter. She needed me now more than ever.
Sometimes the people we trust the most can betray us in the worst possible ways. Though the scars of betrayal remained, they also served as a reminder for the unconditional love he had for his child. What do you think about this story? Let me know in the comments below and like and subscribe for more.